Law enforcement, the activity of some members of the government or other social institutions who act in an organized manner to enforce the law by investigating, deterring, rehabilitating, or punishing people who violate the rules and norms governing that society. The term encompasses police, courts and corrections. These three components of the criminal justice system may operate independently of each other or collectively through the use of record sharing and cooperation. Throughout the world, law enforcement are also associated with protecting the public, life, property, and keeping the peace in society. The concept of law enforcement dates back to ancient times, and forms of law enforcement and police have existed in various forms across many human societies. Modern state legal codes use the term law enforcement officer or peace officer to include every person vested by the legislating state with police power or authority. Traditionally, anyone sworn or badged who can arrest any person for a violation of criminal law is included under the umbrella term of law enforcement. Although law enforcement may be most concerned with the crime prevention and punishment of crimes, organizations exist to discourage a wide variety of non-criminal violations of rules and norms, effected through the imposition of less severe consequences such as probation. Law enforcement organizations existed in ancient times, such as prefects in ancient China, pacutus in Babylonia, curica in the Inca Empire, vigils in the Roman Empire, and medjay in ancient Egypt. Who law enforcers were and reported to depended on the civilization and often changed over time, but they were typically slaves, soldiers, officers of a judge, or hired by settlements and households. Aside from their duties to enforce laws, many ancient law enforcers also served as slave catchers, firefighters, watchmen, city guards, and bodyguards. By the post-classical period and the Middle Ages, forces such as the Santa Hermandades, the Shurta, and the Maracasi provided services ranging from law enforcement and personal protection to customs enforcement and waste collection. In England, a complex law enforcement system emerged, where tithings, groups of 10 families, were responsible for ensuring good behavior and apprehending criminals. Groups of 10 tithings, hundreds, were overseen by a reeve, hundreds were governed by administrative divisions known as shires, and shires were overseen by shire reeves. In feudal Japan, samurai were responsible for enforcing laws. The concept of police as the primary law enforcement organization originated in Europe in the early modern period. The first statutory police force was the High Constables of Edinburgh in 1611, while the first organized police force was the Paris Lieutenant General de Police in 1667. Until the 18th century, law enforcement in England was mostly the responsibility of private citizens and thief-takers, albeit also including constables and watchmen. This system gradually shifted to government control following the 1749 establishment of the London Bow Street Runners, the first formal police force in Britain. In 1800, Napoleon reorganized French law enforcement to form the Paris Police Prefecture. The British government passed the Glasgow Police Act, establishing the City of Glasgow Police, and the Thames River Police was formed in England to combat theft on the River Thames. In September 1829, Robert Peel merged the Bow Street Runners and the Thames River Police to form the Metropolitan Police. The title of the first modern police force has still been claimed by the modern successors to these organizations. Following European colonization of the Americas, the first law enforcement agencies in the 13 colonies were the New York Sheriff's Office and the Edit County Sheriff's Department, both formed in the 1660s in the province of New York. The province of Carolina established slave catcher patrols in the 1700s, and by 1785, the Charleston Guard and Watch was reported to have the duties and organization of a modern police force. The first municipal police department in the United States was the Philadelphia Police Department, while the first American state police, federal law enforcement agency was the United States Marshals Service, both formed in 1789. In the American frontier, law enforcement was the responsibility of county sheriffs, rangers, constables, and marshals. The first law enforcement agency in Canada was the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, established in 1729, while the first Canadian national law enforcement agency was the Dominion Police, established in 1868. By the 19th century, improvements in technology, greater global connections, and changes in the socio-political order led to the establishment of police forces worldwide. National, regional, and municipal civilian law enforcement agencies exist in practically all countries. To promote their international cooperation, the International Criminal Police Organization, also known as Interpol, was formed in September 1923. Technology has made an immense impact on law enforcement, leading to the development and regular use of police cars, police radio systems, police aviation, police tactical units, and police body cameras. Law enforcement agencies. Most law enforcement is conducted by some law enforcement agency, typically a police force. Civilians generally staff police agencies, which are typically not a military branch. However, some militaries do have branches that enforce laws among the civilian populace, often called gendarmerie, security forces, or internal troops. Social investment in enforcement through such organizations can be massive in terms of the resources invested in the activity and the number of people professionally engaged to perform those functions. Law enforcement agencies are limited to operating within a specified jurisdiction. These are typically organized into three basic levels: national, regional, and municipal. However, depending on certain factors, there may be more or less levels, or they may be merged. In the United States, there are federal, state, and local police and sheriff agencies. In Canada, some territories may only have national-level law enforcement, while some provinces have national, provincial, and municipal. In Japan, there is a national police agency, which supervises the police agencies for each individual prefecture, and in Niger, there is a national police for urban areas and a gendarmerie for rural areas, both technically national level. In some cases, there may be multiple agencies at the same level but with different focuses. For example, in the United States, the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives are both national-level federal law enforcement agencies, but the DEA focuses on narcotics crimes, while the ATF focuses on weapon regulation violations. Various segments of society may have their own specialist law enforcement agency, such as the military having military police, schools having school police or campus police, or airports having airport police. Private police may exist in some jurisdictions, often to provide dedicated law enforcement for privately owned property or infrastructure, such as railroad police for private railways or hospital police for privately owned hospital campuses. Depending on various factors, such as whether an agency is autonomous or dependent on other organizations for its operations, the governing body that funds and oversees the agency may decide to dissolve or consolidate its operations. Dissolution of an agency may occur when the governing body or the agent itself decides to end operations. This can occur due to multiple reasons, including criminal justice reform, a lack of population in the jurisdiction, mass resignations, efforts to deter corruption, or the governing body contracting with a different agency that renders the original agency redundant or obsolete. According to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, agency consolidation can occur to improve efficiency, consolidate resources, or when forming a new type of government. UN Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC's work. Technical assistance includes institutional and operational capacity building of law enforcement and judicial bodies to strengthen investigation and prosecution of organized crimes. Training is offered to police investigators, prosecutors, and judges, criminal intelligence analysts, specialized drug and organized crime investigators and customs officials. UNODC delivers a range of trainings to law enforcement officers on topics of relevance to fighting organized crime in their local contexts. It also employs modern technical training such as computer-based training as well as assistance in improving information exchange between law enforcement agencies, custom and border control authorities in different countries. ANOC also supports evidence-based law enforcement responses by analyzing report questionnaires submitted by states parties to the Organized Crime Convention. On this basis, research conducted by ANOC is vital in identifying regional and global organized crime trends, forecasting future trends and strengthening the capacity of states to respond reactively and proactively. A law enforcement agency, LE, is any government agency responsible for law enforcement within a specific jurisdiction through the employment and deployment of law enforcement officers and their resources. The most common type of law enforcement agency is the police, but various other forms exist as well, including agencies that focus on specific legal violation, or are organized and overseen by certain authorities. They typically have various powers and legal rights to allow them to perform their duties, such as the power of arrest and the use of force. LEs which have their ability to apply their powers restricted in some way are said to operate within a jurisdiction. Jurisdictions are traditionally restricted to a geographic area and territory. LE might be able to apply its powers within a state, example the national police for the entirety of France, within an administrative division, example the Ontario Provincial Police for Ontario, Canada, within a division of an administrative division, example the Miami-Dade Police Department for Miami-Dade County, Florida, United States, or across a collection of states typically within an international organization or political union, example Europol for the European Union. Sometimes, the jurisdiction of a law enforcement agency, LE, is determined by the type of violation committed, the specific laws the agency enforces, the affected parties, or the severity of the offense. For example, in the United States, the Postal Inspection Service primarily investigates crimes affecting or misusing the services of the United States Postal Service, such as mail and wire fraud. If, hypothetically, a Postal Inspection Service investigation uncovered tobacco smuggling, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives would be involved, but the Drug Enforcement Administration would not, as even though they investigate drug smuggling, their jurisdiction does not cover specifically tobacco smuggling. In other cases, LE's involvement is determined based on whether their involvement is requested. The Australian Federal Police, for instance, has jurisdiction over all of Australia, but usually takes on complex serious matters referred to it by another agency, and the agency will undertake its own investigations of less serious or complex matters by consensus. LE jurisdictions for a country and its divisions can typically be at more than one level. The United States has 5 basic tiers of law enforcement jurisdiction: federal, state, county, municipality, and special jurisdiction, tribal, airport, transit, railroad, etc. Only the municipal, county, and state levels are involved in direct policing, i.e. uniformed officers with marked cars and regular patrols, and these can still depend on each agency's role and function. As an example for the American tiers, the Chicago Police Department has jurisdiction over Chicago, but not necessarily the rest of Cook County, while the Cook County Sheriff's Office has jurisdiction over Cook County. For the most part they patrol unincorporated area and operate Cook County Jail, and leave municipalities to municipal police departments, and the rest of Illinois, primarily its state highways, are under the jurisdiction of the Illinois State Police. All 3 technically have overlapping jurisdictions, and though their regular duties are fairly different and they typically avoid each other's responsible areas, the Cook County Sheriff's Office typically avoids patrolling Chicago unless it is for penal or court-related duties. They are still capable of assisting each other if necessary, usually in the form of higher-tier agencies assisting lower-tier agencies. A LE which has a wide range of powers but whose ability is restricted geographically, typically to an area which is only part of a country, is typically referred to as local police or territorial police. In some countries, national or federal police also participate in direct policing, although their focus and responsibilities may vary. In Brazil, there are 5 federal police forces with national jurisdiction: the Federal Police of Brazil, the Federal Highway Police, the Federal Railroad Police, the Federal Penal Police, and the National Public Security Force, but the highway police, railroad police, and penal police are restricted to specific area jurisdictions, the Brazilian highway system, railways, and prisons respectively, and do not investigate crimes. The federal police performs various police duties across the country and does investigate crimes, while the National Public Security Force is a rapid reaction force deployed to assist state authorities on request. Typically, a LI is established and constituted by the governing body it is supporting, and the personnel making up the LI are from the governing body's subjects. For reasons of either logistical efficiency or policy, some divisions with a country will not establish their own LIs but will instead make arrangements with another LI, typically from the same country, to provide law enforcement within the division. For example, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, is a federal agency and is contracted by most of Canada's provinces and many municipalities to police them, even though law enforcement in Canada is constitutionally a divided responsibility. This arrangement has been achieved by formal agreement between those provinces and municipalities and the federal government, and reduces the number of agencies policing the same geographical area. In circumstances where a country or division within a country is not able to establish stable or effective LIs, typically police agencies, the country might invite other countries to provide personnel, experience, and organizational structure to constitute a LI, such as the Regional Assistance Mission to the Solomon Islands, which has a participating police force working in conjunction with the Solomon Islands Police Force. In circumstances where the United Nations is already providing an administrative support capability within the country, the United Nations may directly establish and constitute a LI on behalf of the country, as occurred under the United Nations Transitional Administration in East Timor, which operated in Timor-Leste from 1999 to 2002. Related is the United Nations Police, which helps provide law enforcement during United Nations peacekeeping missions. Powers and law exemptions. To enable a LI to prevent, detect, and investigate non-compliance with laws, the LI is endowed with powers by its governing body which are not available to non-LI subjects of a governing body. Typically, a LI is empowered to varying degrees to collect information about subjects in the LI's jurisdiction, intrusively search for information and evidence related to the non-compliance with a law, seize evidence of non-compliance with a law, seize property and assets from subjects, direct subjects to provide information related to the non-compliance with a law, arrest and detain subjects, depriving them of their liberty, but not incarcerate subjects, for alleged non-compliance with a law, lawfully deceive subjects. These powers are not available to subjects other than LIs within the LI's jurisdiction and are typically subject to judicial and civil overview. Usually, these powers are only allowed when it can be shown that a subject is probably already not complying with the law. For example, to undertake an intrusive search, typically a LI must make an argument and convince a judicial officer of the need to undertake the intrusive search on the basis that it will help detect or prove non-compliance with a law by a specified subject. The judicial officer, if they agree, will then issue a legal instrument, typically called a search warrant, to the LI, which must be presented to the relevant subject if possible. Lawful deception and law exemption. Subjects who do not comply with laws will usually seek to avoid detection by a LI. When required, in order for the LI to detect and investigate subjects not complying with laws, the LI must be able to undertake its activities secretly from the non-complying subject. This, however, may require the LI to explicitly not comply with the law other subjects must comply with. To allow the LI to operate and comply with the law, it is given lawful exemption to undertake secret activities. Secret activities by a LI are often referred to as covert operations. To deceive a subject and carry out its activities, a LI may be lawfully allowed to secretly create and operate false identities and personalities and organizations, often referred to as undercover operations or assumed identities. Example: the Australian Federal Police by virtue of Part 1AC of the Crimes Act 1914. Allow and assist the illicit movement of licit and illicit substances and wares, sometimes partially substituted with benign materials, often referred to as controlled operations, example Australia's lease by virtue of Part 1 of the Crimes Act 1914. Listen to and copy communications between subjects, often referred to as telecommunications interception or wiretapping when the communication medium is electronic in nature, example the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation by virtue of United States Code 18 Title 18 Part I Chapter 119 Section 2516. Intrusively observe, listen to, and track subjects, often referred to as technical operations, example Australian lease by virtue of the Surveillance Devices Act 2004. To typically collect information about and evidence of non-compliance with the law and identify other non-complying subjects. Lawful deception and use of law exemption by a lease is typically subject to very strong judicial or open civil overview. For example, the Australian Federal Police's controlled operations are subject to open civil review by its governing body, the Parliament of Australia. Other exemptions from laws. Law enforcement agencies have other exemptions from laws to allow them to operate in a practical way. For example, many jurisdictions have laws which forbid animals from entering certain areas for health and safety reasons. Leas are typically exempted from these laws to allow dogs to be used for search and rescue, drug search, explosives search, chase and arrest, etc. This type of exemption is not unique to leas. Sight assist dogs are also typically exempted from access restrictions. Members of leas may be permitted to openly display firearms in places where this is typically prohibited to civilians, violate various traffic laws in the course of their duties, or detain persons against their will. Interpol is an international organization and is essentially stateless, but must operate from some physical location. Interpol is protected from certain laws of the country where it is physically located. Thank you for watching this video.